Hello there. If you are listening to these words in the early quiet of the morning, or late in the evening when the lights have already been dimmed, you can think of this as a slow conversation. Not one meant to find clear answers, but simply a moment to sit together and notice the smallest movements in everyday life. The kinds of things that are easy to miss when we are busy rushing through our days. I do not know whether you are a Taurus or not. But lately, as I have observed people who carry Taurus energy, and even myself in very ordinary moments, I have noticed that some changes arrive without any noise at all. They do not knock. They do not announce themselves. They do not turn everything upside down all at once. They are simply there. Some changes do not arrive with sound. There is no shock, no clear event to point to and name. It might look like an ordinary morning. You wake up, open the window the way you always do, make a familiar cup of coffee with steady hands, and suddenly realize that you are no longer standing exactly where you used to be, even though everything around you still feels familiar. The feeling is hard to explain. It is not anxiety. It is not quite excitement either. It feels like standing in a room you know well, where all the furniture is still in its place, but the light has shifted. Not brighter, not darker, just different. And because the difference is so subtle, it is easy to walk past it as if nothing has happened at all. Taurus is often associated with stability, with steady rhythms, with a sense of safety that comes from what is familiar. So when something small begins to move inside, not big enough to call a change, but no longer completely still, it can be easier to overlook than anything else. I once saw this clearly in a Taurus friend of mine. Their life looked the same on the surface. The same work, the same roads, the same conversations. But one day they said, very softly, "Lately everything still feels fine. I just do not know why I no longer feel settled inside that feeling of fine." There was no complaint, no desire to run away, just a gentle awareness. Like sitting in a very quiet room for a long time and suddenly hearing the clock tick, not because the sound is new, but because you have finally started listening. Changes like this do not usually demand immediate action. They do not push. They do not pull you forward. They simply place a small question into your day. Am I feeling things a little differently now? And that question does not need a quick answer. It can stay with you all day, all week, like a small flame burning evenly, not flaring up, not going out. In this quiet shift, what matters may not be naming it or trying to understand where it will lead. It may simply be allowing yourself to notice that some changes do not need to be announced. They do not need explanation. They only need to be recognized. If you are feeling something vague, something light, something difficult to put into words, it may not be asking you to do anything right now. It may only be asking you to pause for a moment, to stand still inside that moment, and quietly admit to yourself, I am not standing where I used to be. And sometimes, that alone is already enough for a very gentle beginning. And from that quiet, another feeling slowly begins to surface, very softly, so subtle that, without paying attention, it could easily be mistaken for simple fatigue, or just a day when the mood feels slightly off. But it is not quite that. It feels like walking the same familiar road you take every day. Your feet still land where they always have, but your pace is half a beat slower. No stumbling, no getting lost, just not moving in perfect sync with memory anymore. Taurus is used to stability, to routines so steady they require no thought at all. Waking at the same hour, doing the same tasks, seeing the same familiar faces. For Taurus, a sense of safety often comes from the fact that things do not change. So when something shifts, even slightly, the first reaction is rarely fear. It feels more like quiet confusion, a brief pause, like listening to a familiar song and suddenly realizing one note is being played just a little slower. There are moments when Taurus is doing something they know well, something they have done countless times, and they pause. Not because it is difficult, not because they are bored, just because a strange thought passes through the mind. I do not know why, but this feels different today. That thought carries no demand. It does not ask for an answer. It simply hangs there, suspended, like a streetlight glowing over an empty road at night, bright enough to see, but never harsh. This slight misalignment does not make things worse. It does not make them better in any obvious way either. It simply allows Taurus to notice that they are no longer moving entirely on autopilot, like holding an object that has always fit the hand. Same shape, same weight. Yet the hand feels it more clearly now. A little lighter, perhaps. Or maybe the hand itself has changed. Some might call this change. But that word feels too big for what is actually happening. This feels more like a quiet internal adjustment. Like the hands of a clock moving forward, just enough that you never hear the sound, and only later realize time has passed differently. In moments like this, Taurus rarely rushes into action. The instinct is not to jump immediately towards something new. Instead, there is observation, a willingness to live with that altered rhythm for a few more days, to see where it leads. Sometimes, in a quiet room, Taurus sits down without doing anything in particular, simply noticing whether the heart wants to slow down, or whether it feels ready to move again. And the interesting thing is, that feeling of not being the same as before is not as frightening as it might sound. It does not bring loss with it. It does not demand that anything be given up. It simply opens a very small space, just enough for Taurus to begin listening to themselves in a new way. No noise, no clarity, but real enough that it cannot be ignored. Perhaps in that gentle misalignment, Taurus is learning that stability does not always mean standing still. Sometimes, stability is simply allowing yourself to adjust your pace, to move a little slower or a little differently, so you do not miss the quiet movements unfolding within. And as attention slowly turns inward like that, silence begins to change as well. It is no longer an uncomfortable emptiness that needs to be filled, but something closer to an open space, where thoughts that were once hidden can quietly come into view. These days, silence seems to last longer, not because time is moving more slowly, but because Taurus is willing to stay with it a little longer. There are evenings when the lights are turned on just enough. No music. No blue glow from a screen. Only the steady rhythm of breathing, a faint sound of wind outside the window, and the feeling of sitting inside a familiar room that has not truly been entered for a long time. That silence does not demand that anything happen. It simply allows things to exist at their own pace. Taurus may notice they are speaking less. Not because there is nothing to say, but because there is no longer a need to speak just to fill space or to play a role. Conversations grow shorter. Responses become simpler. Yet inside, there is more fullness. Thoughts arrive slowly. They do not compete with one another. They do not need to be organized right away. It feels like placing old belongings into the light, not to clean them up, but simply to look at them again. Sometimes, within that quiet, a distant memory suddenly appears. There is no clear reason for it. It is not tied to anything happening in the present. Just a faint image. An old road. An afternoon from long ago. A feeling that was once very familiar and somehow forgotten. Taurus does not try to decode these moments. They are allowed to pass through, like clouds drifting across the sky, with no need to hold on to them. Silence also brings questions with it. Not the kind that demand immediate answers, but questions gentle enough not to weigh the heart down. What have I moved through without stopping to look back? Is something inside me changing that I did not notice before? These questions do not create anxiety. They simply create a pause, long enough for the breath to slow. Within that pause, Taurus begins to hear smaller signals more clearly. A sense of tiredness that does not come from the body. A brief moment of joy with no obvious cause. Or simply the desire to stay still a little longer, not to avoid anyone, but because there is peace in the quiet itself, like a small flame placed in the corner of a room. Not blazing, not needing more fuel, just burning steadily, offering warmth. Silence now is no longer the absence of sound. It is the full presence of the self. Taurus does not try to fill it. They simply sit there, allowing it to speak in its own way. And perhaps it is in moments like these that Taurus begins to understand that not every movement needs to be expressed outwardly. Some changes only need to be recognized in stillness, like a late-night lamp illuminating the smaller corners of a room. Not on display, but enough to see clearly where one is standing. And once that sense of where you stand becomes clearer in the moment, old expectations begin to appear in a very different way. They do not disappear. They are not pushed aside. They simply no longer stand at the center the way they once did. Like familiar road signs along an old route, still there, but the light has shifted, and the words on them no longer stand out the way they used to. There are things Taurus once hoped for, things held tightly in the heart for a long time. Those expectations were once motivation, a place to lean on, a reason to keep moving forward with patience. They were shaped by time, by a kind of persistence that feels very Taurus. So when they no longer speak as loudly, the first feeling is not loss. It is surprise. That surprise is gentle. It does not hurt. It does not tighten the chest. It feels like lifting something you handle every day. Same shape, same place. Yet when you pick it up, it feels lighter than you remember. Not because the object has changed, but perhaps because your hands are now used to carrying a different weight. Taurus does not panic when this happens. There is no rush to immediately find a new expectation to replace the old one. Only a brief pause, where a quiet question arises: have I stepped into a different rhythm now? That question carries no anxiety. It simply opens a calm awareness. As old expectations lower their voices, they step back to make room for subtler feelings. It is no longer about what must be achieved, but about how it feels to think about it. And within this quiet shift, Taurus seems to listen more closely to emotion than to the call of goals. There are moments when Taurus looks back at what once felt essential and realizes it still holds value, just not the power to decide everything anymore. Those expectations become markers behind you, reminding you how far you have come, rather than destinations you must reach next. This change does not make Taurus weaker. If anything, it brings a kind of relief that is difficult to name. Within that relief, there is permission not to be certain about everything. No need to know exactly what to hope for next. There is a quiet trust that if an expectation has gone silent, it may have already fulfilled its role in that season. And so Taurus continues forward, without rushing, without the pressure to redefine everything at once. Just moving on with a slightly lighter feeling in the chest. Like the road ahead looks the same, but the backpack on your shoulders no longer weighs quite as much. As that weight begins to lift, emotions start to behave differently. They no longer rush straight ahead the way they used to. They no longer react so quickly that even Taurus cannot tell what was just felt. A very small pause appears between what happens and what is felt. Just enough for the breath to move deeper. Just enough for the eyes to linger a little longer on the same scene. Taurus may notice this in very ordinary moments. A message that arrives late, a careless comment. Before, emotion might have flared up immediately. Sadness felt clearly sad. Joy felt full and complete. Now, the response arrives half a beat later. Not because of distance or indifference, but because a new layer of calm has formed inside, like the surface of a lake after a gentle wind, no longer broken by large ripples. There are times when sadness would seem expected, yet Taurus feels only stillness. Not emptiness, not heaviness, just stillness. Like standing beneath a late-night streetlight on a quiet road, watching life continue to move, without being pulled along by it. And there are moments when joy is expected, something that once made the heart stir, and now it brings only a calm warmth, enough for a soft smile, without pushing for more. This change does not make Taurus uncomfortable. If anything, it carries an unexpected sense of safety, as if emotions no longer pull the self too far away from the present moment. They arrive, they stay briefly, and they seem to know when to step back. No force, no analysis, just allowing things to unfold at their own pace. It feels like walking a familiar road, where every curve is already etched into memory. Yet this time, Taurus does not follow the worn path. Not out of a desire to be different, but because there is a natural slowing, a closer look at the small details along the edges, a fallen leaf, a strip of light filtering through branches, the steady sound of one's own footsteps. The road remains the same, but the experience does not. In this state, Taurus begins to realize that emotion does not always need to lead directly to action. Some feelings only need to be acknowledged. That alone is enough. They are like a small flame in a quiet room. No need to flare up to provide warmth. Only a steady burn, keeping the space gently alive. Perhaps this is a moment when Taurus is learning how to live alongside emotion without being defined by it. There is less need to name everything clearly. Less need to ask, what should I be feeling right now? There is simply presence, sensation, and the quiet allowance for emotion to find its own place. And within this gentle, non-linear movement, something soft begins to take shape. Taurus slowly trusts that there is no need to react the right way. No need to feel according to anyone's expectations, not even one's own. Only the honesty of the present moment matters. Only continuing forward, unhurried, on a familiar path, no longer bound by the old way of walking it. And after walking this way for a while, a very natural need begins to appear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a quiet desire to slow down a little more, to draw closer to oneself. Not to disappear from the world, but to create just enough distance so that outside noise no longer drowns out what is speaking from within. Taurus may notice this in the most ordinary moments. An invitation to gather no longer sparks the same excitement. A free evening suddenly feels precious when it can be spent at home. A warm lamp turned on, a cup of tea prepared slowly, sitting still without needing to do anything in particular. Not because people feel exhausting, but because quiet now carries a very real sense of safety. There is a clear difference between avoiding and choosing to be still. Avoidance carries tension. Stillness does not. Being still is allowing yourself not to respond right away, not to show up in the expected role, not to maintain a certain image. It is simply being present, plain and honest, with nothing added and nothing taken away. In these moments, Taurus seems to take gentler care of their small personal world. Tidying a room, not to make it look better, but to place things where they feel right, where the heart can relax. Opening a window to let the air in, then closing it again when it feels like enough. Very small actions, carrying a sense of soft control, without pressure. Like a small flame carefully sheltered from the wind. Not allowed to flare into something too large, and not left exposed to be extinguished by cold air. Just kept burning evenly, warm enough so the room does not grow cold. Taurus does not need more than that. Just enough. In this quiet, thoughts become clearer without becoming loud. They arrive one at a time, slowly, like light footsteps across a wooden floor. No need to chase them. No need to hold on to them. Simply noticing that listening is happening, and that alone feels like deep care. Perhaps the need to be alone with oneself is not a sign of stepping away from life at all. Instead, it feels like a quiet recharging, in a very Taurus way. No display, no urgency, just making sure that when stepping back out again, there is no heaviness carried forward, no sense of force. Only a full presence, steady and grounded, enough for oneself, and enough for the world outside. From that sense of being just enough, another realization slowly takes shape. Not the kind that makes the heart race, but something that arrives after many quiet moments, when Taurus looks back at their own reactions and notices that their tone has shifted. Things that once created tension now receive only a slow nod. Words that once demanded an immediate reply are left for another day, or sometimes not answered at all. Not out of indifference, but out of a clearer understanding of what truly needs to be carried forward. Then, in a very ordinary moment, on an afternoon with nothing special about it, a thought appears gently. This is not loss. There is no sigh attached to it. It arrives softly, like late afternoon light touching the windowsill, not brightening the room by much, but clear enough to reveal dust floating in the air. It is simply the feeling of growing in a different direction, one that is quieter, one that asks for less proof. This kind of maturity does not require dramatic change. It does not ask Taurus to abandon what is familiar. It does not demand becoming someone entirely new. It only adjusts the way things are seen. What once felt most important steps back slightly. It does not disappear. It simply makes room for values with greater depth. Calm, consistency, the ability to remain with oneself even when nothing feels fully defined. There are moments when Taurus realizes there is no longer a need to win every conversation. No need to prove correctness. Instead, there is a desire to keep the air peaceful, to keep the heart undisturbed. That sense of ease does not come from avoiding conflict, but from choosing where to stand, knowing when to step in, and when to set a coat aside, sit down, and allow things to pass. Because of this, the way life is seen begins to slow. Taurus starts to notice details that were once easy to overlook. The rhythm of breath while waiting at a red light. The sound of a spoon touching a cup. The brief silence between two sentences. These small details do not make life extraordinary, but they make it feel real. And within that reality, Taurus realizes there is no need to move quickly to keep up with anyone else. No need to measure the self each day by old standards. Maturity, in this sense, feels like setting some of the luggage down along the side of the road. Not because the path ahead is shorter, but because walking lightly has been learned, and when looking back, Taurus understands that what matters most is not what has been achieved, but the ability to remain with the present moment without feeling lacking. No need for additional confirmation. No need for recognition. Only the quiet knowing that the steps being taken match one's own rhythm. Steady, and deep enough that each step carries meaning, even when no one else is watching. Within that depth of stillness, Taurus may begin to notice that the most meaningful shifts rarely look like what was once expected. They do not arrive as clear milestones to be marked. They do not carry the feeling of victory that makes you want to turn around and look back. They arrive quietly, like opening a window in the morning and realizing the air smells different, even though the world outside looks the same. There are days when Taurus still moves through familiar routines, walks the same roads, meets the same familiar faces. Yet inside, the way things are felt has changed. There is less searching for something to fill the space. Less urgency to label what is happening. Just a fuller presence with what already exists, and a very gentle curiosity about what is slowly shifting within. This quiet transition does not promise answers. It does not guarantee that clarity will arrive at a certain moment, but perhaps it offers something softer. The understanding that sometimes what is needed is not moving forward quickly, but staying long enough to truly know where you are standing. On a calm evening, when the light is just enough to illuminate one corner of the room, Taurus might find a simple question rising up: when did I change without noticing? That question does not ask for an immediate response. It simply opens a pause, a space where each person can place their own experience in their own way. And as the story settles here, there is no clear ending. Only the sense that everything is still unfolding, slowly and quietly, like a small flame continuing to burn inside a silent room. Perhaps what matters is not knowing exactly where the path leads, but recognizing that you are moving at a pace that belongs to you. And within that calm, each person may carry away a thought of their own, about expectations that have softened, about emotions that have quietly changed color, or simply about the present moment as it is. And let it remain there, gently, like the last light of the day that is not yet ready to fade.